I was 35 years old. The first time I understood what it truly felt like to be alive, and the terrible part, the part that still catches in my chest when I think about it too long, is that it took someone dying to teach me that. Not just anyone. The one person who had spent 30 years trying to show me what living actually looked like. And I had been too busy, too distracted, too convinced that I had all the time in the world to ever sit down and really listen. His name was Daniel. He was my father, and by the time I finally understood what he had been trying to say, he was already gone. But I need to go back further, because the story does not begin with his death. The story begins much earlier, in a house with beige walls, and a man who got up every morning at 5:30 without complaint, and in a boy who watched that man every day and told himself, I will never become that. I will be different. I will be the one who actually lives. I was wrong. And the most frightening thing about being wrong in that particular way is that you do not discover it all at once. You discover it in layers, like peeling something back slowly, until one morning you catch yourself in the bathroom mirror and you see his face looking back at you. And you realize the transformation happens so quietly, you never even heard it coming. My name is Marcus Cole. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Ohio that people always described as the kind of place you grow up in, not the kind of place you stay. There were good people there. People who worked hard and loved their families and coached Little League and made casseroles for neighbors when someone was sick. People who were genuinely decent in all the ordinary ways that society runs on, but no one tends to remember. My father, Daniel Cole, was one of those people. He worked for 22 years at a distribution company that processed orders for hardware stores across the Midwest. His title was Logistics Coordinator. He had 2 direct reports. He drove a gray sedan that he replaced every 6 years, always with another gray sedan, as though the color were part of his uniform. He wore collared shirts in shades of blue that he bought in 3-packs at the same store every spring, and he wore them until they frayed at the collar, and then he replaced them with the same thing. He was not an unhappy man. That is the thing I have to keep saying, because it would be easier if he were. It would be a cleaner story. But he was not unhappy. He loved my mother. He loved my sister and me. He coached Little League until I was 12. He made very good chili. He watched baseball with a quiet, contented attention that always made me feel slightly guilty for finding it boring. He was also a man who had been waiting his whole life for something he could never quite name. I did not understand that when I was young. I did not even have language for it. All I knew was that there was a quality to the way he moved through his days that felt like someone standing at the edge of a diving board, always about to jump, and never quite jumping. At least, I found it years later. After everything, it was tucked inside a book on his shelf, written in his handwriting on the back of an envelope. The ink faded to the pale brown of old tea. The least I'd learned woodworking. Drive Route 66. Read the complete works of Hemingway. Take your mother to Italy. Build a proper garden. Learn to make bread from scratch. Go back to the cabin in the Upper Peninsula where we honeymooned and stay a whole week. Simple. Things. Beautiful things. A whole small life of experiences, condensed onto the back of an envelope. Waiting. Always waiting. He had been waiting to retire. 8 more months, he said. 8 more months, and then it all begins. He died 9 months before he could begin. But I am getting ahead of myself, because the story of what happened to my father is also the story of what was happening to me, running in parallel the whole time, just slightly out of sight. By 32, I had assembled what looked, from the outside, like a reasonable adult life. I had a sales job at a tech company that paid enough to be comfortable. I had an apartment in a neighborhood that had started gentrifying, which meant good coffee shops and interesting murals on the brick walls and parking that was becoming increasingly impossible. I had a gym membership I used sporadically, a streaming subscription I used constantly, and a habit of ordering delivery food at 11 at night. Because I had spent all evening meaning to cook, and had somehow arrived at 11 without having done it. I had a girlfriend named Sandra. She was smart and funny, and had a warmth that I appreciated without fully understanding how to receive. We had been together for almost 3 years, which felt like a long time, and also felt, on certain evenings, like not very long at all. We talked sometimes about what was next, about living together, about the future. The conversations always had a slightly abstract quality, like we were discussing the plot of a movie we had not decided whether to watch. One night in March of the year I turned 32, Sandra sat down across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Marcus, I need to tell you something." I remember exactly where I was sitting. I remember the half-finished glass of wine in front of me. I remember the sound of the rain against the window. That particular gray March rain that feels less like weather and more like a mood. She said, "I feel like I am living with someone who is always waiting for his real life to begin, and I cannot keep waiting with you. I do not think you even know you are doing it, but you are. You have been doing it the whole time. I have known you, and I do not know how to be in a relationship with someone who is not here." I remember my first reaction was defensiveness. I said, "What do you mean, not here?" "I am right here." I said it almost as a joke, as though pointing out the obvious could diffuse the conversation. She did not laugh. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has been practicing a hard conversation for a long time, and has finally decided to have it. She said, "Your body is here. But you, Marcus, the real you, the you that wants things and feels things and shows up for things, that version of you is always somewhere else, always getting ready, always about to..." I did not understand what she meant. I did not let myself understand what she meant. We argued. We talked in circles. A week later, she moved out, carefully and without drama, the way she did most things. She took her plants and her good knife and the French press and her half of the books we had accumulated, sorted with such precision that I later realized she had clearly been thinking about this separation longer than I had known. I told myself she had unreasonable expectations. I told myself she wanted something I could not give, and that this was more about her than about me. I told myself I was fine. I threw myself into work. Prima stage ed latte, I hit my targets. I got good feedback. I told myself this was what forward motion looked like. And I was 32. And I was doing exactly what my father had done. And I could not see it at all. The call about my father came on a Tuesday in September. I was in a meeting, which felt wrong in retrospect. The way ordinary things always feel wrong in retrospect, when they are interrupted by news that reorganizes everything. My phone buzzed and I saw my mother's name and I thought, I will call her back after. I nearly let it go to voicemail. I did not. Something made me pick up. A reflex, maybe? Or something quieter than a reflex. Something that had always been underneath the noise of my life, waiting to be heard. My mother's voice was very calm. It was the calmness of a woman who has decided to hold herself together by force of will alone, and you can hear the effort in the spaces between the words. She said, "Marcus, your father has had a stroke. He is at Riverside. You should come." I told the room I had a family emergency. The faces around the table expressed appropriate concern. I drove to the hospital with the radio off, which was unusual for me. I almost always had the radio on. The silence felt necessary. Appropriate. Like removing shoes before entering somewhere sacred. He was alive. I want to say that clearly and with the weight it deserves. He was alive, and for 3 weeks after the stroke, he remained alive. He could not speak. The right side of his face had a slight downward pull that had not been there before. His right hand could move, a little, the fingers flexing with visible effort. And when I sat beside his bed and held that hand, he would squeeze mine. Not hard, just enough. Just enough to say, "I am here. I know you are here. This means something." He could not say the words, but his eyes were completely, devastatingly. Every time I walked into that room, his eyes found mine immediately, and in them I could see everything that I could not hear. I could see that he knew exactly what was happening. I could see that he was frightened, and that he was working very hard not to show it. I could see love, uncomplicated and direct, the way his love had always been, which was one of his great gifts, and one of the things I had never quite known how to hold properly. I visited every day. I sat in the chair beside his bed and I talked. I talked about things that did not matter. I talked about a project at work. I talked about the game the previous weekend. I talked about what I had eaten for lunch. I talked because the silence was too large and too full of everything I had never said, and I could not figure out how to begin saying any. of it in a hospital room with fluorescent lights and beeping machines, and a nurse checking in every 2 hours. I talked and talked, and he watched me, and I think he knew. I think he could see me not saying what I needed to say. The way you can sometimes see a thing more clearly when you cannot speak. On the 16th day, he had a second stroke. Smaller, but in a more vulnerable place. The doctor spoke to us in a hallway that smelled of floor cleaner and coffee from a machine down the corridor. She said things. I processed some of them, and the rest scattered. My mother held my sister's hand. I stood slightly apart from both of them, which was my habitual position in hard moments, the observer at the edge of his own family's grief. On the 20th day, my father died at 4:17 in the morning. I was not there. I had gone home at 11. I had told myself I would be back first thing. The nurse called, and I lay in the dark looking at my phone for what felt like a very long time, but was probably less than 30 seconds. Then I got dressed. Then I drove back through the empty early morning streets to the hospital. I will not describe the room in detail. There are some things that are private, not because they are shameful, but because they belong to a particular moment in time that cannot be translated into words without losing what made it real. What I will say is this: standing there, in that room, at 4 in the morning, with my father in the bed and the machines quiet and the particular quality of light that hospitals have before the day shift begins, I felt something I had not anticipated. I felt recognition, not just grief, though grief was there, enormous and patient, waiting its turn. But underneath the grief, or alongside it, or woven through it, recognition. The recognition of a pattern I had been refusing to see. The recognition that the man lying in that bed had been waiting his whole adult life for the right moment to begin living fully, and that I was standing in exactly the same posture he had stood in his whole life, and that I had been waiting to, and I did not know what I was waiting for. And I was beginning to understand that no one was going to tell me. The funeral was on a Saturday. The church was full. 22 years of working with the same people, of showing up reliably, of being decent in all the ordinary ways, had built something. The pews were full of people I half remembered and people I did not know at all, and all of them had something to say about my father that was true and also somehow insufficient. The way eulogies always are, the way words are always insufficient when you are trying to contain a whole person in them. A woman I did not recognize came to me after the service and held my hand in both of hers and said, "Your father used to talk about you. He was so proud of you." And then she said, "He always sighed. I just need to get to retirement. Then we will really have time." He always said that. She meant it kindly. I know she meant it kindly. But the words stayed with me in a way I could not shake for a long time afterward. He always said that. He always sighed. Once I get to retirement, once I get through this next thing, once things settle down, once. The months after his death was strange. I went back to work. I met my targets. I ordered delivery food and watched television and went to the gym more than I had in years, which I understood even then was displacement rather than health, a way of moving the body so the mind would not have to be too still. I called my mother twice a week. I called my sister less, which I felt guilty about and which I corrected eventually. The question came and went. That question, the one I had started asking in the parking lot outside my apartment at 7 in the morning, the morning I drove home from the hospital. What are you waiting for? It would appear without invitation at the most ordinary moments, in the middle of eating a sandwich at my desk, in the shower in the 10 seconds between lying down and falling asleep. What are you waiting for? It was not accusatory, it was almost gentle, but it had the quality of something that will not leave until it is answered. 3 months after my father died, in December, I did something I had not done in years. I acted on an impulse without analyzing it first. I had been sitting at my laptop at 11 at night, not working on anything specific, just scrolling. The way you do when you are trying to fill time without admitting that is what you are doing. And I came across a photo of a cabin near a lake in northern Michigan. Bare winter trees, gray water, a small wooden dock, a sky the color of slate. I booked it before I could talk myself out of it. 7 nights. A week by myself in a cabin in December, which by most reasonable assessments was not an obvious prescription for anything good. I packed a bag the following Saturday, told no one except my sister, and drove north through the flat gray landscape of the winter Midwest until the landscape started to change. Until there were more trees and fewer strip malls and the road narrowed and the sky came down closer. And then I turned off the highway onto a dirt road that was barely a road, and the trees closed in on either side. And I found the cabin. It was small. It was cold in the way that buildings are cold when they have been empty for a while. There was a wood stove that took me 45 minutes and 3 false starts to figure out how to use. There was a porch that looked directly at the lake, and the lake was the same gray as the sky, so that where one ended and the other began was not entirely clear. And standing on that porch in the cold was like standing inside a painting of winter, like being contained in something. The first day was genuinely difficult. I did not have the coping mechanisms I normally relied on. No work to fill the hours, no noise, no stream of small urgencies to navigate. Just the cabin and the lake and the wind and the trees and my own thoughts, which turned out to be considerably louder than I had remembered. I walked along the edge of the lake for an hour without knowing why I was walking, without any destination. I sat on a flat stone and looked at the water. I thought about my father. I thought about Sandra. I thought about the list I had never made. I thought about the years since college, laid out in my memory like a map of a territory I had traveled through mostly asleep. That evening I made a fire and I opened the notebook I had brought and I started to write. I had not written anything that was not a work document in years. The act of picking up a pen and putting it to paper felt almost foreign at first, the way physical skills feel when you have not used them in a long time. But I started, and once I started, something opened up. I wrote about my father. I wrote for a long time. I wrote about the blue-collared shirts. I wrote about the Sunday dinners that always had the same structure, the same dishes, the same comfortable rhythm. I wrote about the sound of baseball on the television in the background of summer evenings, that particular sound that I had grown up associating with safety and boredom in equal measure. I wrote about a memory that had been sitting in me since I was 7 years old, a fishing trip that had ended in rain. We had been at a small lake about an hour from home. My father had rented a rowboat. We had been out for maybe 2 hours when the clouds came in fast and low, and the rain started without much warning, and my father rowed us back to shore, quickly, expertly, with the easy competence he had in physical tasks that always surprised me because it did not fit the rest of his image. We had taken shelter in a small shed at the edge of the property, the kind of low wooden structure that exists at lakeside places for no clear reason but seems always to be there. My mother had packed sandwiches. We sat in the shed and ate them while the rain came down on the wooden roof and made that particular sound that rain makes on wood, dense and rhythmic and somehow reassuring. And my father had said something, I cannot remember what, something small, and then he had laughed, really laughed, the way he did so rarely, a laugh that came from somewhere genuine and deep and unguarded. And I had thought, at 7 years old, with the clarity that children sometimes have about things that adults have learned to look past, this is what he looks like when he is happy. This is the real one. I had not thought about that moment in almost 30 years. Writing it down in that cabin, with the wood stove finally doing its job, and the lake invisible beyond the dark window, the memory came back with such completeness and such vividness that I felt the age collapse between then and now. I felt like I was simultaneously 7 and 35. Simultaneously, the boy who noticed his father's real laugh, and the man sitting alone in a cabin trying to understand what had gone wrong with time. Primera crié de... I had not cried properly since the funeral. I had not cried at the hospital. I had not cried driving home at 4 in the morning. Something in me had been braced, locked up tight against the grief, as though feeling it fully might break something that needed to stay intact. But there in the cabin, alone, with no one watching and nothing to be managed, I cried for a very long time. When it passed, I felt something I had not expected. I felt, underneath the sadness, a kind of clarity. Not peace, exactly. Not resolution. Just clarity. The sensation of seeing something that had been blurry suddenly come into focus. I spent the rest of the week writing and walking and reading and sitting on the porch in the cold. I slept 8 hours a night, which I had not done consistently in years. I ate simply, the way you eat when food is fuel rather than comfort or entertainment. I built fires every evening with increasing competence, and a pride in that competence that was entirely out of proportion to the achievement. and that I found unexpectedly joyful. On the last morning, I sat on the porch with coffee and watched the sun come up over the lake. The sky went from dark blue to pale gray to the faintest rose. And then the sun cleared the tree line, and the water lit up in a way that was so simple and so complete that it did not seem to require any commentary. I sat with it for a long time. Then I opened my notebook and I made a list. Not the list you make when you are trying to become a better version of yourself through discipline and self-improvement programs. Not a bucket list of dramatic experiences designed to prove something. Just a list of things I actually wanted. Things I had been pushing to the edges of my life for years. Things I had been filing under later, under Sue, under once things settled down. I wrote, start the company. Not as a fantasy, but as a decision. Write down the idea properly. Find the people who would know whether it could work. Take the first actual step, rather than carrying it around like a decoration. I wrote, call the people I have been meaning to call, not in the abstract. Specific names. My cousin James, whom I had not spoken to in 4 years since we had both gotten busy in different cities. An old friend from college named Patrick, who had sent me a message 18 months ago that I had read and meant to respond to and had somehow never responded to. My sister, more often. More honestly, I wrote, go to Iceland. I had been saying I would go to Iceland since I was 26. I had no rational reason not to have gone. I had the money, I had the time, or I could make the time. I had simply not gone because going had been in the category of things that would happen later, when things settled down, when the timing was right, when I was somehow more ready. I wrote, learn to cook 3 things properly. I had always been a barely adequate cook, surviving on takeout and simple things, and I had always told myself that someday I would learn to actually cook. Someday I wrote, quit the job. That one I stared at for a long time. Not because it was impulsive. It was actually the opposite of impulsive. It was the most considered thing I had written. I had been in that job for 4 years and had known for at least 2 of them that it was not the right place for me. That I was good at it but not alive in it. That I was doing it the way you do something that pays the bills and is not offensive, rather than the way you do something that uses the real parts of you. I had known this, and I had kept showing up and doing the work and collecting the paychecks and telling myself, it is fine. It is a good job. People have worse problems. I will figure out the next thing when the time is right. I wrote it down and I did not cross it out. The drive home felt different. This is difficult to describe because nothing was visually different. The highway was the same highway I had driven north on. The city appeared on the horizon in the same way it always did. The familiar skyline against the pale winter sky. But there was a quality to the looking that had changed. A quality of attention, a willingness to actually see rather than to drive through on the way to something else. I took the first step on the company the week I got back. I wrote a document, not a business plan yet. Just a document that said, here is what I know. Here is what I think. Here is why I think this is needed. Here is why I might be the right person to try to build it. I sent it to 3 people whose judgment I trusted and asked them to be honest with me. All 3 of them wrote back within 48 hours. 2 of them said versions of, I have been waiting for you to do something like this. The third said, the core idea is solid. The market entry strategy needs work. Here are the 3 things you need to figure out. That third response was the most useful thing anyone said to me professionally in that entire year. I quit my job 4 months later. I had enough saved to give myself 12 months without income. I had a business plan. I had the beginnings of conversations with potential customers. I had fear, enormous quantities of fear. The kind that lives in the chest and wakes you up at 5 in the morning with a voice in your head that catalogs every way things could go wrong. Every resource you might run out of. Every person who tried something like this and failed. But I also had something else. Something I had not felt since I was maybe 22, finishing college. Standing at the edge of the world for the first time before I had learned to be afraid of it. I had the feeling of being inside my own life, not on the outside of it, watching from a careful distance, not in the waiting room. Inside it, present, engaged, my own. I booked Iceland 3 weeks after I quit my job, on a Tuesday evening, same way I had booked the cabin in Michigan. On impulse, with 6 days' notice. I flew into Reykjavik on a Thursday morning in April, exhausted and disoriented and almost immediately overwhelmed by the quality of the light, which is different there in a way that I cannot fully account for. A clarity and a northern slant to it that makes everything look slightly more real than you are used to. I rented a car and drove out of the city, along roads that cut through landscapes that did not look like anywhere I had ever been. Lava fields covered in moss, the color of something from another planet. Mountains with snow on them that caught the low light in ways that made them look like they were generating their own illumination. The occasional farmhouse, small and orange, against the immense emptiness around it. The sky, which that first afternoon was that particular Icelandic blue that is somehow more blue than other blues. I stopped the car twice, not at any designated viewpoint, just at the side of the road. I stood in the wind and looked. The wind was cold and completely indifferent, and it moved through me with the easy authority of something that has been doing what it does for a very long time. I stood there and I felt small in a way that was not diminishing but clarifying. Small the way you feel when you stand in the presence of something large enough to put your smallness in perspective. I thought about my father. I thought about his list on the back of the envelope. Drive Route 66. Take your mother to Italy. He had never done either. He had never gone anywhere that was far enough from home to make him feel the particular vertigo of being elsewhere. The disorientation that resets your calibration and shows you things about your ordinary life that you cannot see from inside it. I called my mother from Iceland. I called her standing outside a small guest house near a glacier, which felt appropriately dramatic. She answered on the second ring and she said, "Marcus, where are you?" And I said, "Iceland." And there was a pause, and then she said, "Your father always wanted to go there." And I said, "I know." And there was a quiet between us that held both things at once. The loss and something else. Something I do not have an exact word for, but that felt like continuance, like a thread being carried forward. I came back from Iceland with something I had not taken there. It was not wisdom exactly. It was not any kind of resolution or conclusion. It was more like permission. Like I had given myself permission to be interested in my own life. To take it seriously, to treat it as the thing it actually was, rather than the thing I had been treating it as, which was a rehearsal for something else. The company grew slowly. Growth is always slower than you plan for and faster than you fear, which sounds like something someone would put on a motivational poster, but happens to be true. The first year was hard in the specific way that making something from nothing is always hard, which is not the dramatic difficulty of disaster, but the grinding difficulty of incremental progress, making a little bit of headway every week, making mistakes and correcting them, learning things you should have known and some things you could not have known until you were in the middle of doing them. I hired my first employee in the second year. Her name was Diane, and she came from a company much larger than mine and took a pay cut to join, which I found alarming and motivating in equal measure. She had a quality I had learned to look for by that point, which was the quality of being genuinely present in the work, of caring about it with the part of herself that was not just performing caring. I called Patrick, my old college friend, the one whose message I had left unanswered for 18 months. I called him on a Sunday afternoon in March, sitting in the kitchen of the apartment I had by now lived in for 5 years, drinking coffee, looking at the light on the buildings across the street. He picked up immediately. He said, "Marcus Cole, I figured you were dead." "Primera, la judide," I said. "I know." "I am sorry," he said. "Do not apologize. Just talk to me." We talked for 2 hours. We had one of those conversations that seems impossible until you are in the middle of it. The kind where you pick up exactly where you left off as though time has not passed. Where the intervening years compress into something brief and manageable. He had been through things I had not known about. A difficult divorce. A year where things had been very bad, in the quiet, private way. That things can be bad while appearing fine from the outside. He had come through it, which was clear in the way he spoke, with a kind of settled weight in his voice that had not been there when we were younger. I told him about my father. He already knew from mutual people, but I told him properly. I told him about the room at 4 in the morning. I told him about the list on the back of the envelope. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "What did you do with the list?" And I said, "I kept it. I have it. It is in the book I took from his shelf." Patrick said, keep that list somewhere you can see it. Not as a memorial, just as evidence of the things a person can want and delay and delay and delay. Sandra and I had coffee once, about a year and a half after my father died. It was her suggestion, a casual message on a platform we both used, and I accepted without overthinking it, which was itself evidence of change. We met at a place in her neighborhood that was warm and dimly lit and smelled of coffee and cardamom. She looked well. Happy in the way that is not dramatic, but sustainable. The happiness of someone who has figured out something important about what they need and has arranged their life to include it. We talked for almost 2 hours. Before we said goodbye, she said, "You seem different, Marcus." And I said, "I think I am." She said, "I am glad." And she meant it. I could hear that she meant it. And there was something clean and complete in the exchange. Something that did not need to be more than what it was. I have thought a lot about what she said to me the night she left. I was not ready to hear it then. The thing about truths we are not ready for is that they do not go away. They wait. They have a patience that can outlast any amount of resistance. They wait until a door cracks open, until something else creates enough space, and then they slip through. She had seen the waiting in me before I could see it myself. She had named it clearly, and I had deflected it, and it had not mattered, because the truth did not need my acceptance to remain true. There are things I understand now that I could not have understood at 30, or even at 34. Not because I am particularly wise, I am not making that claim, but because some things require time and experience and loss to become visible. Like how presence is not a personality trait. It is a practice. It is something you choose, over and over, against the constant pull of distraction and deferral that modern life offers in almost unlimited supply. Like how the life you are living right now is the actual one, not the one you are preparing for. Not the one that'll begin when things settle down. This one, the one with the imperfect apartment, and the unfinished projects, and the relationships that need more attention, and the dreams that are still just shapes in the background. This is the real one. This is all there is. Like how the people we love are never as permanently available as we assume they are. We carry this assumption, mostly unconsciously, that the people who have always been there will always be there. That there will be time. That the conversation we have been meaning to have can be had later. That the gratitude we feel but have not expressed can be expressed eventually. Eventually, when the moment is right. The moment is almost never right. The moment is right now. It is always right now, and we keep missing it. And sometimes we keep missing it, until we cannot miss it anymore. My mother went to Italy. She went 2 years after my father died, with her older sister, who had always been the adventurous one, and had always tried to get my mother to come along somewhere, and had always been told, maybe next year. They went for 2 weeks. She came back with photographs, and a tan, and a quality of expansiveness about her that I had not seen before. Or perhaps I'd seen and had not recognized. She told me, over the phone, about standing in the Sistine Chapel and looking up. She said, "I understood why people believe in things when I stood there," she said. "I kept thinking your father would have loved this, and that was sad. But it was also," she said, "its own kind of thing. A tribute, or a continuation. My father would have been 67 this year. I think about him every single day, which surprised me when it started and which no longer surprises me. The way he is present in small things. The way I catch myself making coffee in the morning with the same quiet efficiency I watched him make coffee for my entire childhood. The way I sometimes laugh at something and hear in my own laugh that particular sound. The unguarded, genuine one. The one I first noticed at 7 years old in a shed by a lake in the rain. I keep his list. It is tucked inside the last of the 11 books I took from his bedside table. The list is on the back of an envelope that has soft edges from being handled. When I feel the old habits returning, the waiting, the deferring, the telling myself that the real beginning is just around the corner, I look at it. Woodworking. Route 66. The complete works of Hemingway. Italy. A proper garden, bred from scratch. A week at the cabin in the Upper Peninsula. He never did any of them. He never got to the other side of the threshold. He stood at the door his whole life, his hand on the frame, and the door never swung fully open. I am not interested in doing the same thing. So every morning, before anything else, I ask myself the question that has been following me since 4:17 on a September morning 3 years ago. In a hospital room with the machines quiet and the day not yet begun. What are you waiting for? And I make a choice. Not a grand gesture. Not a declaration or a transformation or a dramatic break from the old self. Just a small, quiet, daily choice to be where I actually am. To show up to the day I actually have, rather than the one I am preparing for. To treat the present as the real thing rather than the anteroom of the real thing. Some days, I do this well. Some days I forget entirely, and only remember at 11 at night, in the middle of scrolling through something I will not remember tomorrow. On those nights, I put down the phone and I lie in the dark for a moment and I think, tomorrow, and I mean it in a different way than I used to. Tomorrow is not the postponement. Tomorrow is another chance. Tomorrow is another door. I think about you sometimes. I think about whoever's listening to this, in whatever moment you are in right now. I do not know your life. I do not know what is in it. I do not know what you have been deferring, what you have been saving for the right moment, what version of yourself you have been meaning to step into when things finally settle down. But I suspect, because I have lived this and been this, that you have been waiting to. Maybe a little, maybe a lot. Maybe for so long that the waiting has started to feel like just the way things are, like a background condition of your life, rather than a choice you are making every day by not making any other choice. And I want to say to you what no one said to my father in time. What no one said to me until Sandra said it, and I was not ready. And then life said it through the worst possible door. The right moment is not coming, not in the way you are imagining it. Not as a clearing, a period of quiet. A phase of stability where everything is finally in order and the conditions are finally right and you can finally begin. That phase does not exist. The conditions are never right in the way we wait for them to be right. Life does not clear itself to make room for your real beginning. Your real beginning is right now. It has always been right now. It is this ordinary, unremarkable day, that is actually the only day you have. The only one that is real and present and yours to do something with. I am not saying this to create urgency through fear. I am saying this because I stood in a room at 4 in the morning and I understood something I cannot unknow. Something that I carry with me now, not as grief, but as a kind of lantern. My father is gone, and I would give everything I have to be able to tell him. The books are extraordinary. Italy is everything you imagined and more. And you did not need to wait to become who you already were. You were already the person who deserved those things. You did not need to earn them through 22 more years of collared shirts and 40-minute commute. You were already there. But I cannot tell him that. And so I tell myself every morning when the waiting tries to come back, quiet and familiar and convincing as it always was. Not yet, it says. Soon. When things settle down, and I say back to it, no. Now. Today. This Tuesday, this ordinary Tuesday, that is the only Tuesday I have, and the only one I will ever have. I went back to the lake once, the lake where we had gone fishing, where it rained, where we had eaten sandwiches in the shed and I had heard my father really laugh. I drove there on a weekend last fall, by myself, without any particular plan. The shed was still there. Someone had fixed the roof. The lake was the same. The trees were turning, the way they do in October in that part of the country. Gold and red and orange, and it's a sky that was the most impossible blue. I sat on the dock for a long time. The water was cold and moving slightly, catching the light. I did not think about anything in particular. I just sat and looked and breathed and was there, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in all the ways that matter, everything. The sky is blue today. I noticed it this morning the way I notice it most mornings now, with a quality of attention that is still new enough to feel deliberate, though I hope it will eventually become simply the way I see. I stood outside for a few minutes before going into work, and I looked at it. Just look. The way I have been practicing looking. The way I am still learning. It was here the whole time. All of it. The sky. The day. The moment. The moment. The possibility of being present inside your own life, Rather than waiting at the edge of it, it was here, the whole time. And sometimes it takes the most unbearable thing to finally make you look up and see it. I do not know what you are waiting for. I do not know what threshold you have been standing at, what lists you have been building in the back of your mind, what version of your life you have been saving for later. Like the good china that only comes out for special occasions while the ordinary days pass without ceremony. But I know this, with the kind of certainty that only comes from having been wrong for a very long time and finally being right. The special occasion is today. The ordinary day is the whole thing. The threshold is the door. Step through,